We've got Avi Press here, CEO and co-founder of Scarf. Avi, nice to meet you. Actually, we've connected before. And I want to dive right in with you. Let's talk about what Scarf is doing, how you came up with the idea, and where you are today.
Great, yeah, and thanks for having me. So I would describe Scarf at a very high level as a platform for distribution, analytics, and commercialization for open source software. It's something that has come out of really my own experiences, both being an open source maintainer myself, as well as being on the other side, like an engineer at a bigger company that was relying very heavily on open source. Sometimes not being able to partner with the maintainers we relied on as closely as we would like. But as a maintainer myself, I was distributing like command line tools, that kind of thing, where I didn't really have any window into how those tools were actually being used. Mm-hmm. But I did know that companies were using them because of who was pinging me on GitHub. When I'd get like a irate person from Adobe saying like, you need to fix all these things, and I'm just maintaining these tools in my spare time. And so, I was thinking very deeply about that fact that I had companies using my open source tools, and made some efforts to try to commercialize them, but really just fell very flat to do so. And I really kind of honed in on the two issues that I just completely lacked any good data to make any reasonable business decisions. And that once I had made those decisions that I'm going to try to commercialize in this manner, like I just didn't have tools to easily do that, like brokering a license or a support contract are, actually a lot harder than they may seem, especially if you're just a developer without kind of training in those sorts of domains. And so, Scarf is, ultimately kind of the answer to those problems on both sides of the equation to try to get maintainers better data, give them the tools they need to connect with their commercial end users, and ultimately just be successful with whatever it is that they're trying to achieve.
Great, yeah. So everything you just laid out in terms of capturing data, understanding how users are, how they're behaving, downloading it, using it, those are all solved questions or solved problems in the SaaS world, right? But in the open source world, and this is actually how you and I met, right? In the open source world, it's not a solved problem. Most open source projects are flying blind. I mean, I know from my own experience, we started looking at top-line metrics like GitHub stars. We still do, right? But it's an unsolved problem in open source. Is that broadly correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think there's multiple elements to it. There's like how can we technically collect this information, which is actually not so hard, I guess. You can always instrument these things. You could stand up your own servers, backends to start to collect this information and phone it home. But then you'd run into all the end user pushback from doing something like that. And so, I think where open source is today, and this is changing, especially with things like Scarf, that is kind of the assumption of open source that this is kind of no one owns the code. We're all just, using it freely, no permissions, no nothing. And that's changing over time because it's kind of led us to a kind of untenable, state here with all sorts of really critical components of society running on open source today, and the creators not having any idea what's going on. And so I would say this is still overall a very unsolved problem of like getting this data out and getting it to maintainers, but largely not from technological purposes, but more of kind of just the state of the ecosystem and kind of the history of how we got here.
Yeah, because usually what I've seen other companies do before Scarf was, they would wait for adoption. Either somebody would send you an email. What else? I've seen how people would do reverse IP lookup on their website, and then, if 5 people from Nike are coming to our website, odds are they're probably are using us, and I'm going to just send a bunch of SDRs on it. So I really don't need to do that anymore, right? Like now I get at least usage metrics, right? You don't collect PII if I'm correct, right? Is that?
That's right. So we are using, so if someone downloads, say, your Docker container or tarball or something via Scarf, we temporarily have that IP address, and we will go look up all associated metadata, and then we delete the IP address from our system completely.
Right.
And that's really helpful because that means that maintainers can use us without, for instance, violating GDPR or other kinds of regulations that make it very challenging to collect this kind of information. And so, we can't leak it to you because we don't even have it.
Fantastic. Yeah. Maybe can you explain in detail how exactly Scarf works, and maybe at a level where also non-technical users can understand it?
Yeah, definitely. So,
and if you want to, sorry to interrupt. If you want to screen share and show a few things, that's cool as well. That's
Oh, interesting. I don't have anything like prepared right now, so I'd probably be fumbling around. So maybe I'll just explain for right now.
Yeah.
So the idea is that it's just different tools all fitting together to give a picture of kind of different stages of someone's journey with your open source. And so, the first thing that people typically do is they'll look at your docs or they'll look at your website. And so we offer free pixel tracking that you can embed in your, say your README and your tutorials and all these different things, so that no matter where on the web or even in someone's like text editor on their machine, if they're reading about your project, you can then capture some of the information with that traffic. Then, after they've read about your product and decided they want to try it, they're going to download it from one place or another. And so what Scarf does is we offer basically a layer that will sit in front of wherever that software is actually hosted. So whether they're just downloading a file from something, maybe they're downloading a package via a package manager, Scarf can kind of act as that endpoint where people are going to, even though we actually are not storing the software itself. We just kind of redirect the traffic to wherever you've told us it needs to go. And what happens then when we see those downloads, we can then look up things like company information of like what company they work at, where in the world they are, all these kinds of things that currently users don't have. And so these pieces start to fit together when you can correlate those things. Oh, we saw someone visit your docs, and they visited the tutorial, then they downloaded the software at this version on this platform. And then soon, this is not something that we do a lot of right now, but then instrumenting telemetry of like what actions they took within the software itself. And so trying to provide this really unified picture, of someone's journey with open source is basically what Scarf, is today and trying to do. And, down the road as well, more tools you can actually, who do you actually go contact at that business? How do you say broker support contract with them or sell a license or, get them to buy your cloud offering or whatever that might look like?
So your customer, from what you just told me, open source marketers, I expect them will be all over this, right? I would hope. Yeah. But it sounds like you have two different customers or users. There's definitely somebody who needs to instrument the pixel and basically the technical part. But the data consumption, I feel like there's the marketer of the actual audience. And then what I found really interesting when I read your mission is that you also strongly believe in sharing that data with contributors and maintainers, right? So I can now tell somebody who contributed to my open source project, I can share data about, I can share adoption data with them, right? Which obviously is rewarding. When I contribute code, I want to know if people are using it, right? Broadly correct?
Right. Yeah, I think that, our policies with respect to like, you've collected this data on Scarf, like who can see it, is something that I think we're in the very early days of kind of figuring out the best policies there. And so what we've done so far is say, well, leave it up to the project owners for how they want to share that data. And so, maybe you're sharing that with maintainers, maybe you want to share that with open source researchers or whoever else might be interested in it. But ultimately, we look at that as the project owner, as the person who is developing and distributing the code. That's your call to make. We're just kind of an agent helping you capture, collect, and use that data. So we're kind of just leaving it up to the projects to figure out what the right practices are in this in this way. Over time, we will learn what works and what doesn't for different projects, and then do whatever we can to make the best practices very easy.
Yeah. We already had internal debates like, gosh, this data is so rich. How can we put it to use? Other than us looking at what the classic marketer would be called your funnel, right?
Right. And so the idea of I think the idea of funnels has been very SaaS focused.
Yeah.
Like all these things, and I think what people are learning is that open source is kind of a really great product-led growth strategy that you can kind of apply to all sorts of different domains, and funnels are kind of one of those things that are now going to be more applicable now that the data's there.
Yeah. And on your blog, I saw you had a guest blog post by somebody from PostHog. PostHog is product analytics, open source product. Can you talk a little bit about that? How that extends the data set you have, how you work together, and where you see that going in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, Scarf has mainly been focused on the distribution channels for your software. So how are people finding it? How are people downloading it? How are people updating it, and that kind of thing. But we've been a lot more conservative when it comes to instrumenting that kind of telemetry in the runtime of the piece of software. So that's kind of the barrier of where Scarf has been to date historically. And you can certainly use us to do the sorts of more very ingrained telemetry like PostHog does. When it comes to product analytics, that has been less of our wheelhouse. So you can use something like PostHog on a normal web application, or just like a phone app, or really any kind of application where users are taking actions and you're collecting data. And so PostHog is kind of the more traditional product analytics that you might get from a variety of other providers. But they have the really great approach where they take, they're using open source to accomplish these things, so you can self-host it, you can modify it, all those sorts of good things that you get from open source. So we're much more focused with the distribution channels of open source today. So PostHog and Scarf actually complement each other very well for a lot of open source products that you can use in very different ways. And so I think I see what we do as needing to fit into a much larger ecosystem. And we're expanding that over time, but you got to fit in with all the other tools to be successful.
Yeah. Well, I think you solve arguably the most important part, which is distribution, right? If nobody uses my software, I'm not going to get product analytics, right? So.
Exactly. Yeah. Step one for sure. And that's kind of the crazy thing that we just haven't had that up until now. It's so basic, but no one knows.
I'm not an engineer by trade. I know enough to be dangerous. I think that's a fair statement. My co-founders are all engineers, and we had the discussion, and we just didn't know, right? And then Doris, who our developer experience engineer, she said, guys, there's this thing called Scarf, right? And so I feel like it's super early, but we're last night I told you I had dinner with the CTO of ArangoDB. I told him about it, and he got all excited. And it's just it's you can tell when a product there fulfills a need, right? A plus causes an emotional reaction.
Love to see it. And I think it's such a night and day difference too. Because when I was a maintainer doing this stuff, I was distributing one of my things or one of my projects on a package manager for the programming language it was built in. And all I would get from that is just the total cumulative number of downloads ever. Same with Docker Hub. That's all Docker Hub gives you. NPM is nice enough to give you downloads each week. And that's, considered quite good for the space. So it's just really seeing the difference there, I think is very illuminating for a lot of people, which is, this is why we do it,
So a few weeks ago, I want to switch a little bit to the company and how you're planning on building it and funding. A few weeks ago, you announced that you had raised the seed round, I believe, right? It was a seed round. And can we talk, before we talk funding and investors, can we talk a little bit about, there's always this question of why now, right? Sequoia has a whole channel on why now, but what is the why now for Scarf? What has changed in the industry? And I think you and I know the answer, but I think for the audience, it's super useful to find out and hear how you think about it.
Yeah, I think there's a few macro trends in the space right now that we that make this well timed. So one of them is just, I think, the voices saying that maintainers need to get paid, or that it's actually not a great state of affairs where very large companies are like routinely exploiting the work of like free work from software developers is like no longer actually a good state of affairs. And so what used to be very controversial, saying, oh, maintainers should get paid for their work, is no longer such a controversial statement anymore, which has had a lot of people, saying, okay, that's great, but like, how are we going to go about doing that? And that's where there's a lot less agreement about what the right thing to do is. And so I think like the overall mission of the company, in terms of like, we want to help connect open source developers to their customers, make both sides of that equation more successful. The overall mission of the company is something that resonates with a lot of people in that way. Like a lot of people have felt the pain of either side of this, and are looking for, are wanting solutions to that. The other aspect here, I think, is that, we're getting into a more data-driven time in terms of running businesses. It's, a focus of a lot of people and companies to make very data-driven choices. And there's been kind of a gap in this space to be able to actually go do that. And so I think these things, those things together were kind of a tailwind for us. And then what's actually been kind of both a headwind and a tailwind is the fact that analytics in open source have, been so taboo. Yeah. Actually was something that, at first was very difficult to try to find something that end users were okay with. But now that we've kind of figured out a solution to this that end users are okay with, and maintainers and businesses, creators really love, mean that it kind of has kept bigger companies from trying to do this as well. Like, why isn't GitHub doing this today? Well, it's kind of controversial to do analytics in open source, and so they haven't really meaningfully. So we've kind of been able to really grow and show, actually, this is actually a good thing that benefits maintainers and end users to start tracking this stuff. And so it's kind of allowed us to grow without a whole lot of other competition in the space here, in terms of in terms of having bigger companies that come in and just do the same thing. This data's around. The data, people have it. Registries have had it for the entire time that open source has been a thing. It just hasn't been shared. And so kind of our philosophy here is kind of like, we're going to democratize this. Every creator, you should own what you create. And if you create, a viable software project on those distribution channels, like, you should be in charge of those, kind of in charge of the policies around them.
Yeah. So ultimately, it almost comes down to two drivers. Personal reward, right? I get to see what my work is doing. And then the second one is if there's actually a monetization component in there where I can say, now I have this data, I can compensate you. I think Airbyte recently, in their business model, introduced a way of saying, hey, if you build a certain collector or module, we're going to compensate you. I guess that's going into that direction. I don't know if they use Scarf, but I guess that's their business model. They should be using Scarf.
Yeah, the founder, Michel, he's made it. There's a Scarf account that's been made. I think they haven't really been actively using it yet, but this is a great reminder to follow up with that.
Well, we're going to use this video to tag him and draw attention to this fact, right? Because I feel like obviously their vision is aligned with it. Yeah. Okay.
Very much so. I hadn't heard about their compensating people that build the connectors, but I think that is super cool.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of been a key thing for us, and I think a lot of companies in the space, is that there's a lot of power and potential in aligning your business model with that of the people in your community. Just like incentive engineering can take a lot of things very far. And that's why that's why open source has had a lot of troubles, is that there's a lot of mixed incentives. And that's where a lot of things go wrong.
Yeah. When incentives are not aligned, I agree. I mean, look, I can tell from a personal experience, my previous startup was a SaaS startup. And so our business model was like, I give you a software subscription, you give me money, right? And right
Easy.
now, right now we're just in quotation marks an open source product, Risotto, and we're not monetizing, right? So for us, the reward is really only like, hey, if people start using it and we see that, and for that for us right now is the business model. Obviously, we want to grow as well and then have future plans, but like it just the fact that we can see adoption and that Scarf helps us see that is a game changer for us. So maybe going down, if we keep going down the path of the why now, what has changed, can you talk a little bit about how you went about fundraising, what worked, what didn't work? If you were to do it all over again, what would you do differently? And just share some lessons learned, because there's tons of companies out there in the open source space right now raising money.
Yeah. So I raised our first round of capital summer of 2020. And at the time, we were just really getting started. I was only working with my co-founder, Tim, who's now our CTO. And we had tried a couple different products, and one that had finally started really taking off. And basically, it was kind of like I had gone out to talk to investors about 6 months prior to that, the very beginning of 2020, with a product that had just like a tiny amount of adoption, but not a whole lot. And I was also by myself at the time. And so my first efforts to try to raise some capital for Scarf fell very flat because I didn't have a team. I had a product. I had a very, very like audacious vision for what I wanted to do, but not a whole lot of proof that I could actually, make that vision happen. And so, 5 months later, I came back with, 2 co-founders and a JavaScript library that was being downloaded, I think 200,000 downloads a week on this JavaScript library, which showed the progress. And the progress, I think, is what really got the lead investors for our first round of funding, Wave Capital, to bite, because they saw, I think they saw the progress, they saw the vision, and there was actually some proof that there was something there. And so I think, one lesson from that is go have the conversations, even if the chance of success is low, just go try. And when investors see the progress that is being made, can really inspire the confidence that gets them over that hump to have the conviction to write the check. I think the other lesson there, which I think has really stayed with me in a lot of other contexts, is just the power of talking to someone and getting the intro to someone else who gives you an intro to someone else, and so on. Because Wave was not the first investor that I talked to, but I got an intro to them from another investor who was not up my alley, but you should talk to these guys. And whether it's sales or product feedback and discovery or partnerships or whatever it might be, just having lots of conversations and making sure that you get another one from that one, and just kind of having that chain out. There's a lot of power in that, I think. And so, ultimately, our first round of funding, we raised $2 million, which kind of kicked everything off, and we were able to hire our initial team. And from there, we built out kind of the tool set that you are using today.
Got it. Yeah. How many people right now? And now you're in Oakland right now. Is everyone in Oakland, or are you?
I am in Oakland, but the team is very distributed. We're kind of all over. So all over the Americas, got some in Europe. Trying to stay on some similar time zones, but already there's just great talent in Europe, and we don't want to cut ourselves off from that. Surely the rest of the world as well. So it's been, definitely been a challenge of, all the things about remote work life that are really tough, but we're dealing with them like everything, and it gets us a much more diverse team as a result. We've got about, there's 13 or 14 of us total at Scarf now, some part-time, some full-time. But it's the team building has been one of the things I've enjoyed most about this whole thing. It's just it's so cool to have a bunch of people that are just, really mission driven. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. I think this has been a super interesting conversation. Before we close, I wanted to hear, is there any customer story you can share where Scarf has been really I guess in a personal context, you would say like a life-changing moment. But is there something? Are there some anecdotes you can share from customers or users where they came back, like us, where we said, "Oh my God, where were you 6 months ago?" Right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think some good examples. Like I've heard some founders say that they are like using Scarf's dashboards to just do their pitches for fundraising because we're showing all the companies that are coming in. And so being able to actually say like, look at literally in the last week, these companies showed up. In the previous week, these companies showed up, and seeing those arcs and being able to actually show them has been a really cool one. I think I'm trying to think of other good ones. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I guess that's a good point. How do I consume Scarf's data? It's in a dashboard, right? When people go to your website, it is scarf.sh. That's where they can see this. Yeah, I can tell I maintain my data in a spreadsheet right now, and that will change soon.
Well, you can export Scarf's data into CSVs and do whatever you want with them as well. But yeah, I think we have the dashboards as well, but some UI redesigns are in progress as well to make those a little bit better, which is something I think is needed. And I think the other things that customer stories that we've heard that are interesting. One of our users, IHP, it's like a web framework for Haskell, and they were like very surprised because they're a German company, and we're very surprised that most of their users are in the United States. They didn't even know that, and like. Just really basic questions that like if they're just such table stakes in the SaaS world that are like for open source people like, oh my God, I know where everyone is now. That's really helpful. Is cool to see, and also just like, oh my God, how have we been dealing with this complete lack of information up until now? Has been very cool. And otherwise, just being able to show, I think. When I see people tweet stuff like NASA's using my library and just like an indie developer, like I love hearing stuff like that and seeing how excited people get to see the impact of their work is far and away the most rewarding part, I think, of just people seeing like, oh yeah, my work actually has impact. Because being an open source maintainer is sometimes a very draining and exhausting experience. Yeah. And so if we can kind of bring some joy to those people and show like, hey, this work you're doing is actually very impactful, like that is, it hits me in all the feelings.
Oh yeah. I think you've barely scratched the surface. I think it's because this, like you said a few minutes ago, this mindset in open source that it's taboo to track and anything, and I think you completely changed the conversation to rewarding maintainers, economic lift, distribution. Like it's a rising tide that lifts everyone. So I think you have glorious days ahead of you. I know we're super happy users. We just started using it, and so I can't wait to see the data.
Great to hear. I'm looking forward to seeing all the ways we can continue to help. And thank you.
Awesome. Avi, this was a great conversation. Avi Press from Scarf. Thanks so much, and speak soon.
Thanks so much, Lars. Appreciate it.